everyone, welcome back to my channel. For the month of September, I have a lot of books to go over. To start with, I have a couple of books that I don't have physical copies of on me. One is Bird Box, which I already did a video on, and like I said in that video, I lent that copy out to my roommate, so I don't have that. And I won't bother reviewing the book because I talked about it in that video. The other book that I don't have a physical copy of, I read on my phone, and that was definitely outside of my wheelhouse. I didn't like it at all. I just read it because it was the highest rated free book that I could get. It was called Knocking Boots. It was by some lady with like a fake name, like Willow Winters or something. I'll see if I can find it to link down below. In any case, I really didn't like that book. It was a romance, so I knew I wasn't gonna like it. It was just super cliche, super predictable. The characters were really bland, and it was just gross. And all of their problems could have been solved if they just talked to each other. And I think that makes for a really boring read. So definitely not my thing. Having that out of the way, I guess let's jump into, I had 3 nonfiction reads this month. I read Do No Harm by Henry Marsh, Stories of Life, Death, and Brain Surgery. This book is by a British brain surgeon. As a nurse on a neurosurgery unit, I found this book super fascinating to get the surgeon's perspective on our patients and their outcomes and things of that nature. And Henry Marsh I had never heard of him before, but has apparently had like this really long career where he's seen like a lot of different changes that have advancements that have happened in neurosurgery. So this was super interesting to read. I really excuse me. So this was super interesting to read. I really enjoyed it, and I think if you're interested in medicine and brain surgery in particular, you'll really enjoy this book too. I also read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I have mixed feelings about this book. There were some parts of it that I really liked and could really comprehend, and I felt like it was written to someone like me who doesn't necessarily have a really strong background in physics, but I felt like there were also parts of it that were over my head, and I was kind of struggling to understand the material. And I mean, I understand it's like a very brief text of some very like complicated subject matter, but that was kind of frustrating to me that there were some parts that were like dumbed down to my reading level, and some that where I was like, you haven't given me enough, like the subjects that he was going into, I was like, you haven't given me enough background in this book for me to understand what you're talking about now. So I feel like this is a book, maybe when I do some more reading in this area, I could come back to and reread this and probably have more appreciation for. I'm not saying that it was bad in any way. There were just some parts of it that were a little meatier than I could handle. And the last nonfiction book that I'm going to talk about, technically I didn't finish it in September like all these other books. I finished it, but today that I'm filming I finished it, and it's October 2nd, so I thought I would just go ahead and go over it. It is How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. This book, it was heavy. It was a lot. I had read a couple other books recently, kind of on this subject matter, and kind of my critiques of them, I was like, they're kind of surface level. Like the books that I read, what was it? So You Want to Talk About Race and White Fragility, and those books were kind of slim. They were kind of, just, I feel like really basic information on like how to not how to be anti-racist like this one is, but like what is, like more of saying like what is racist, like what actions are racist, and like what people say and think that are racist, and how we can kind of start to change the narrative. And I don't know how to like really describe it. You'd have to read it. But this book I felt was just a lot heavier. Like the author has a PhD. What is his PhD in? It's something like in this subject matter, the like African American psych studies or something like that, where he like has much more formal education in the subject matter. And I don't know, like this book was, I mean, it was just heavy to read. Like I said, the other books I could kind of breeze through. This book definitely, like, I had to read a chapter and like sit with it. There's a lot in this book that it covered. Definitely super educational, definitely highly recommend, especially if you are someone who's trying to educate yourself. And if you were like me and you were reading these other books and you were like, this is kind of subject matter that I've already like covered or I understand, and I'm trying to get like deeper rooted in the issues, then this would be a good book for you, I think. After that, let's go into, I read one contemporary in September. It's, I don't know if it's really I don't know if, what is my voice doing? I don't know if it's really YA contemporary, but I read Again But Better by Christine Riccio. And I don't remember if I noticed when I picked it up that this, or if like I got this book a long time ago. So I can't remember if I bought it intentionally because it was by a booktuber, or that I didn't know it was by a booktuber, but here we are. And unfortunately, I really didn't like this book. If you liked Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, you'd really like this book. I really hated Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, so this book was 100% not up my alley. The main character I felt was really immature, and just not likable. Like, she was written to be like really goofy and relatable, but it was like ridiculous. Like, cause like the girl literally every time she sits down in a chair knocks the chair over. And as someone who is like very clumsy and like trips over stuff and drops things all the time, I can still, at least most of the time, get out of a chair without knocking it over. So that was unenjoyable. This book also has, it's called Again But Better because basically there's like this time travel, not really a plot twist, but basically the main character like gets an opportunity to like go back in time and make some decisions during her college years like differently than she did. And it was just felt like awkwardly handled to me. Like, it didn't feel really organic. I don't know how to describe it, but it just wasn't, the situation with time travel just like didn't make sense. Like, I couldn't suspend disbelief enough that scenario made sense. So I didn't really enjoy this book, unfortunately. And also it's like mostly a romance. Like, most of the thing that she gets to go back and change is like she messed things up with this boy that she really liked. And romance isn't my thing at all, so I didn't care for it. Moving right along, let's talk about maybe maybe YA sci-fi. I'm trying to I'm looking at my like stack. I'm trying to figure out if I read more YA sci-fi or fantasy. For starters, for the YA sci-fi, I read Mirage by Samaya Dodd. I hate not liking this book because it has really great representation. The author is, I want to say that she's Persian, but so it's a sci-fi book, but it's set in like a universe, a galaxy. All of the characters are like people of color, and it definitely draws on like Arabic and like Middle Eastern culture for inspiration for these cultures. But this book was super boring. Basically, the main character, whose name I forget, Amani, is part of a people group that's been like conquered by these other people. Like, they're all on planets, so it's like instead of like conquering nations and like people groups, they're conquering like other planets. Anyway, she's like an oppressed person, and on the day of like her coming of age ceremony, she ends up getting kidnapped by like the royal like regime like the royal regime, because she looks like the princess. And so in the book, she is basically becomes a body double for the princess, because nobody likes the princess. So if she has a public appearance she needs to make, they send Amani instead, because if somebody tries to assassinate her, it doesn't matter because she's not really the princess. And that's pretty much all that happens for most of the book. Eventually, the boy that the princess is like betrothed to figures out that Amani isn't the princess. And he convinces her to tell a couple other people that who she really is. And people decide they want her to like spy for them. Like the oppressed people group want Amani to like spy on the princess and like the royal family for them. But nothing really ever happens. Like Amani kind of like awkwardly listens around corners and things like that. She's not like, it's not like really good spy work. And then the ending was really disappointing to me. Spoiler alert, I guess, if you want to read this book. But in the end, Amani is going instead of the princess to some kind of public appearance again, and there's an assassination attempt, and she survives. But the princess ends up like, the princess and Amani have started to become friends, and the princess like basically is like blames Amani for the assassination attempt and is like, I'm never going to trust you again. And the book kind of ends like there's going to be a sequel, or there is a sequel, I don't know if it's out, but it ends with like they're going to torture Amani because there was this assassination attempt and they think that she knew about it. But that doesn't make any, like, maybe I missed something, but it doesn't make any sense to me that Amani would know about the assassination attempt and then still have herself go out instead of, like, the princess so that she risks assassination. I feel like that would make the princess be like, oh my God, I trust you so much, because even if she did suspect her of knowing of the plot, because it'd be like, you knew that you were risking death and you would still, like, go out for me and like risk that. Or it just doesn't make sense that they would blame Amani for the assassination attempt when Amani was the one who would have died. So that was really disappointing to me. That was that book. A letdown. The other YA sci-fi book that I read in September was the Illuminati Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. And this book kind of surprised me because I didn't realize when I bought it that it's like a mixed media book. Like, there's a lot of parts of it. It's not like a traditional storytelling. It's like emails and files and then like transcripts of security footage and stuff like that. And so at first I was like really annoyed by it because there's also like, the book looks really thick, but I read it in probably a couple of days because there's so many pages that are lost to like graphics or like them only putting like a few words on pages for like emphasis, I guess. So I really didn't think I was gonna like it, but I actually ended up enjoying it. I still think I would have been probably more happy if they just told it like a regular story. But it definitely was neat. I do appreciate, I guess, the risk taking. I am interested in picking up the sequel to this. It was cool. It was fun. It's about basically, they're in outer space. It's these two teenagers. There's a boy and a girl. Now I'm trying to like figure out how to describe it because again, it's kind of like weird, non-linear, like piecemeal storytelling. They both kind of the boy gets forced into the military. The girl, I forget like what she gets forced into, but like the military won't let her in. There's like this intergalactic battle. There's a virus that goes loose on one of the ships, which post-COVID or during COVID, I guess, it's funny to read a book about there's like a viral outbreak on this ship and they're talking about like quarantining people. And people are like, you can't quarantine us from each other. And all this jazz. That's kind of like, that's literally what's going on now with COVID, so that's fun. And then there's also an artificial intelligence AI on the ship that is also like one of the main characters, basically. And I mean, really, there's a lot that happens in this book, and it's kind of hard for me to sum up the plot. I'm doing the best I can. I'm just one person. Okay, moving into the YA fantasy. Let's start with, I finally finished the Shadowhunters series, I guess, or is it the Mortal Instruments series? Is that what you call it? I don't know. But I read City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. This I thought was my favorite book of the series, actually. I felt like the story really came together, like the characters and everyone really matured. I think I read this like at the very beginning of the month. So now, yet again, I'm struggling to summarize the plot. But I just remember that I did really enjoy this one. I feel like we finally had moved more away from all of the weird incest plot lines and just like bringing up incest. It was finally toned down more in this book. So I got, what is the trilogy that comes after this? Is it the Clockwork whatever? I don't know. I got a book in another series by Cassandra Clare, still Shadowhunters. I guess keep an eye out for it soon in a video. Then I read the first two books in the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children like series. So the first one is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And I liked this first one. I really admire how Ransom Riggs, just like the story is so unique. I did really hate when people saw me reading like this book or the second book and were like, oh, that's neat, like what's it about? And then you have to describe it because it goes like this. Well, there's this guy, this boy, he's like a teenager, and he comes across his grandpa who's been like brutally murdered, and it like him and his grandpa were really close, and it like really messes with him that he's seen him dead. And he like finds these letters, or he finds out that his grandpa had, when he was a child, lived in like a children's home in Wales. So he convinces his family over the summer, he goes to Wales to try to find the children's home that his grandfather had lived at, because he wanted to try to find people who knew his grandfather so he could kind of talk to them and get closure. Well, when he's in Wales, he finds out that the home basically that his grandfather was like lived at when he was a child was a safe haven for peculiar children who are basically children who are born with special powers. And to stay safe, the home that they're in is in a time loop. So they have like she's basically like a kind of like a nanny or like a schoolmaster, Miss Peregrine, who makes time loop on one day. So the kids just live this day like over and over again. And the kids like are aware of the passage of time and know that they're living the same day over and over again, and like make memories of that day. But like for the village and like the people around them in this time loop, it's kind of like a Groundhog Day scenario. Like they have no memory of, like they don't know that they're living kind of in a time loop. And basically the main character, Jake, thinks that he's just like a regular kid and is just like fascinated by all this stuff, but then he finds out that he too is peculiar, and he has the ability to see like these evil monsters that are out to get the peculiar children. And it turns into like kind of this adventure. The monsters are out after them, and Jake has to work with the children in order to save them, because the monsters are invisible to everyone except for Jake, and apparently his grandfather also had the same ability. So the book ends with like the monsters basically have chased the children and Jake out of their home. That's book 1. Book 2 picks up right where book 1 leaves off. Book 2, I feel like I didn't like as much as the first one. There was a lot more world building, which I don't know if I really loved or not. But it was also super fast paced. It was just like one thing after another. Like the whole book takes place over like 3 days, and it just, so much happens, and like things go wrong at every turn. But then like whenever things go wrong for the kids, it like quickly rights itself, so they like keep going. Anyway, the book ends. They have thought that, so also Miss Peregrine can turn into a bird, Miss Peregrine Falcon. And so at the end of the first book and the beginning of this one, she's like stuck in bird form. Well, then at the end of this book, spoiler alert, it's the second book in a series that came out like a hot minute ago. But they turn the bird, like they think that Miss Peregrine is like stuck in bird form, so they get someone to help them like turn her back into a person, and they find out that it's actually not Miss Peregrine, it's like her evil brother. And so like again, this book ends, the kids still want to find Miss Peregrine, and they're now in the clutches of like her evil brother and like the monsters and all that stuff. So that's Hollow City. I already have the whole series, so I'm going to be continuing reading it, but I hope that the third one is a step up from this one, because this one just kind of felt like a lot of filler. Like there was a lot of action and like things happening, but again, like world building was being talked about, but there wasn't really a lot going on with character development necessarily. So Hollow City. And here's another book that I'm really sad that I didn't like because again, it's like it should have been like such good representation, so I hate not liking it. It's A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kimmerer. Sorry. And the main character of this book has cerebral palsy. So that's like, again, like the good representation. However, once I started reading this book, I realized I really shouldn't have picked it up because it was so obviously something I was not going to enjoy. It is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, so it's a romance, and I don't like romance. And it's a YA romance, so it's like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I felt like the main character, what is her name? Harper? And I forget the monster's name, or not the monster, the prince or whatever, Wren. I didn't think that Harper and Wren really had any chemistry at the beginning of the book. So, hang on. Let me start from the beginning. Harper basically gets kidnapped by Wren, the princess. I think his name is Gray. He's like the commander, or he was like the commander of the guard. He kidnaps Harper and brings her back to like this other fantasy world to try to break this curse. Where Wren is not a monster the whole time. He starts out as a person, and then like after a couple months he turns into a monster, and it's like this cycle where he's like person, monster, and apparently his friend Gray has been kidnapping girls for like centuries, capturing girls for centuries to bring them to Wren and hoping they fall in love. Because besides this like transition from person to monster, Wren, like the witch that has cursed Wren, has also stuck him in like a loop basically of time where like centuries have passed, but he's not gotten any older. And in the kingdom around him, people think that a much shorter time has passed. Like I was saying, Wren and Harper don't really have any chemistry. At the beginning of the book, it made it seem like Harper and Gray were gonna get together, and I was a lot more interested in like a Beauty and the Beast retelling where she doesn't get with the Beast, she gets with the Beast's best friend. But that didn't happen. And also it didn't make sense to me, like the guy Wren is like, when he's a person, he's literally like the most vanilla guy ever. Just like super basic, not really a lot of character traits. Harper's always like, you're so arrogant, and I'm like, he's literally just a normal guy. You're just like have so much attitude. He's just a normal guy. And it didn't make sense to me because he's like, for centuries, like these girls have been coming to me, but nobody can fall in love with me, this and that. And I'm like, but why? You're telling me hundreds of girls like you've dated and you haven't gotten any of them to love you? And then also hundreds of girls, and when they kidnap Harper, it's like, you're the first girl who's ever fought back. And it's like, what? Like, you've kidnapped all these other people, all these other women, and no one has ever fought back against you? They've all just been like, oh, okay, cool, I got kidnapped and brought to like a magical fantasy kingdom and I have no idea where I am or who you are. It's just, I don't know, I really didn't like the trope. It was like so heavy on the Harper's not like other girls, and I'm like, Harper is like most teenage girls. She just also has cerebral palsy. Like, we don't have to make her be like, you're so special. Like, it's okay if Harper is just like other girls. So I didn't enjoy that book. It was also super slow at parts, like, because basically it's just a romance, and really all you want to do is for Harper and Wren to get together, and of course Harper and Wren end up getting together. It could have been a lot shorter. There's a lot of the author tried to do like political intrigue as far as like Wren's kingdom, having like invaders coming in, and he's trying to protect his kingdom, and it just didn't work out. It wasn't meant to be like that, I don't think. She could have cut all that out and just had it be like a kind of easy, cheesy YA romance. And I could have finished it a lot sooner. Another YA fantasy book that I read was House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Cragg. this is a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses, which is a lesser known fairy tale. I found out when I was telling people that it was a retelling of The 12 Dancing Princesses. I don't remember exactly how that fairy tale works. Now I'm going to remember exactly how it works. There's like these 12 princesses. Their shoes are always worn out, even when the king buys them new ones. So he says that if someone can figure out why his daughter's shoes get worn out so fast, they can marry one of his daughters. I don't think it's a particular one. And nobody can figure out who it is. And then finally this one guy does, because he follows them at night. And the princesses basically like sneak out through the secret doorway. And they go through like these 3 different woods. I think the prince follows them for 3 different nights, because they go through these different woods. It's like one is gold and one is silver and one is, who knows, bronze. Like the trees in the woods. And he like every night gets a different leaf from the trees. And so and he like dances with the princesses, and like on the morning of the 3rd day, he tells the king what's been going on. He's got the leaves as like evidence, and one of the princesses marries him. The end. This story I thought was kind of interesting because it was a really dark retelling on that fairy tale, where the sisters are like dying one by one. They live, it's like very atmospheric. They live in this like island kingdom, and I don't know, it's just like very dark and gloomy and like salty. I will say I felt like the romantic pairing between the main character was like way too insta-lovey, and there was like a love triangle between this guy that she like, this like hot new guy that she falls in love with like at first sight, and this guy that she's been like friends with for forever. And I was like, that's such an overdone trope. Like, can we stop having that happen? Because like, of course, the guy that's been her friend forever really likes her, and she really doesn't like him back. She just sees him as a friend, and I'm just so tired of seeing that. Like, it's so boring, like after the first time that you read that in a story, and it's been done in like every YA fantasy book ever. So I feel like if you are not hoping for like a really mature, believable romance, you might like this book. And if you want something like spooky and probably really good for October, actually, this would be a fun book for you. But it just wasn't like mature enough for me as a reader. I actually did have one 5-star read this month, and that was Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This book is kind of a perfect marriage between fantasy kingdom and dystopian hellscape. So like right up my alley. Basically, there is a kingdom that used to be, there's like a hierarchy where the ruling class were people who rode dragons, and everyone else was like differing classes below them. Well, 9 or 10 years before the start of this book, there is a revolution where the dragon riders basically get overthrown because they're incredibly cruel. And the new regime is that people will test into a class. So you can test to be a dragon rider, or you can test to be like working class, or test to be like a scholar, things like that. And it's supposed to be like this perfect system where everyone is where they belong, and you have the ability to like move between social standings. However, that system is kind of flawed, because obviously if you were a peasant before this new regime and you're being tested for what your skills and knowledge are, you're much more likely to test to be a peasant instead of like the ruling class. So in that way, there's still not a lot of movement for people. And the leaders of the regime are, of course, like corrupt. I think you can see that coming. The main characters in this book are a boy and a girl. One, obviously they have a romance with each other, but this one I didn't mind as much. The boy main character, Lee, is actually a child of like the dragon riding ruling class. So he was like born into wealth and like all of this, and he ends up testing to be a dragon rider, but has to like hide his true identity, because otherwise he will be killed, because like his whole family and like people were murdered to like overthrow them and get them out of power. And his best friend, Annie, was a like peasant girl who had her whole family murdered by Lee's father before the like rebellion. And she is really struggling with feeling inadequate, not knowing how to act like a ruling class, because she also tests to be a dragon rider. So a lot of conflict in the book is like Lee and Annie trying to help each other out. Like Lee is trying to teach Annie how to like behave like a more substantial person, to fit in with everyone around her, and Annie tries to teach Lee how to behave not like the rich kid that he really is. And then things get kicked up another notch because Lee's cousin, and it turns out, survived the uprising as well, and she comes back to find him, and basically there is I think it's like an island or something, where people in the ruling class, kind of those that could escape the like massacre, kind of settle down with their dragons and have been like waiting to come and take back the other nation where like Annie and Lee live and are dragon riders. And so Lee has to grapple with, does he fight on the side of the new regime that upholds not that you're born to be whatever, like you're not born to be something, you can learn and you can grow and you can change, or does he join his cousin and his family members and fight on the side of you are who you were born to be, and they believe that they were born to be leaders, so they have the right and power to overthrow everyone else and have control over them, basically. So I thought this book was really neat. I really liked the dragons. I really liked the social commentary that this book has, the like nature and nurture debate that this book has. It's really fascinating. And if that sounds like something you would be into, then I highly recommend this book, because I did really enjoy it. At first I felt kind of shaky about it, and the world building, because really the author just like throws you in the deep end. Like she doesn't explain things and like build up to things. You're just like trying to figure out as you go along. But once things start to make sense, everything clicks, and I really enjoyed it. So those are all of the books that I read in September. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.